widow's journey. 3 days after his father's funeral, John Leadam and his mother Charlotte were packed into a pony cart by his uncle for the journey to York. They travelled in silence for many dull miles before his uncle spoke. "I'm sorry things turned out as they did, me lad. We had such plans, you know. Your father and me. We fancied a day at the point to point. Fate's a funny thing. None of us knows what's in store for us or how the choices we make will turn out. We just have to make the best of what we've got." It took the whole day to travel from Walkington to York. At 5 o'clock the next morning, John Leadam stood in the tavern yard watching flurries of soft fat snow dancing in the light from the inn. The London Flyer was in the yard ready to go. The snow fell thickly, swirling towards the ground then disappearing into muddy puddles in the gravel. Charlotte Leadam said her last goodbyes, and thanked her brother-in-law. She said she would write as soon as she got home to Southwark. John allowed himself to feel the comfort of his uncle's embrace for one last time, then pulled himself away and joined his mother in the padded box on wheels that would take them back to London in less than 48 hours. The city streets were dark and silent, except for the sound of horses' hooves and the rumble of the carriage along the cobbles, as they headed south onto the Great North Road. Charlotte rested her head on her son's shoulder and closed her eyes. John wondered what she was thinking. Was she reliving the awful events of Christmas the way he did every time he closed his eyes to sleep? Did she see his father's face as life slipped away from him? Was she reflecting on the moment when his father told her that he loved her, and that she should not mourn him when he was gone? John stared silently out of the window watching the frozen landscape go by. He realized that the few days he had spent with his parents in Yorkshire were the first time he could remember being alone with them. His father had worked 6 days a week, rising before 7 each day to open the surgery and to supervise the work of his apprentices, before visiting his patients in their homes. At noon he had attended operations at Guy's, and after lunch he had made his hospital rounds or taught. When all this was completed he attended hospital committees and functions in the evenings. Even on Sundays they were rarely alone. They either went to his grandparents' house in Wimpole Street, to his Aunt Emma's in Bread Street, or to Mr. Hawes in Gracechurch Street, or their family and friends came to eat with them at Tooley Street, except for his grandmother, who made a point of never travelling south of the river. In fact, when John thought about it, he had hardly spent any time alone with his father at all. His mother had taught him to read and write, even in Greek and Latin, and it was his father's apprentices who had helped him with his homework from the grammar school. Only after his father had died had his uncle told him stories about their childhood. The snow that had threatened all day arrived south of Newark. The wind whipped up the river valley, funneling the stinging motes of ice into the horse's eyes and the driver's face. Although the blizzard spun in every direction, the driver pressed on. The landscape became featureless and white, apart from the broad black streak of the river, and they were 2 hours late when they arrived in Grantham. The inn was full of people oblivious to the weather, eating and drinking and making merry. In the chimney a great golden fire roared, and on the sideboard stood a huge 12th night cake covered in pink sugar paste. The weary travellers were invited to join the revellers, but his mother elected to eat in their room, and they were both asleep long before the dancing began. Before dawn they were back in the coach, the driver warning them that he would turn back if they encountered deep snowdrifts or fallen trees. They set off in trepidation, the driver holding the eager horses to a slow walking pace. The passengers exchanged the requisite morning greetings with Mrs. Leadam and her son, then settled down to sleep off the excesses of the night before. John leaned on his mother's arm and closed his eyes. His mind was still full of questions to which he had no answers. Resting on her arm, he realized that more than anything he wanted to be a boy again. He was not ready to be a man. They arrived at the ivy-covered White Horse Inn in Eton Socken more or less on schedule. Once again, the horses were changed and new passengers joined them for the final 50 miles to London. The carriage was full for the first time, and John found himself squeezed into the corner on the front-facing seat next to his mother. The packed coach lumbered onto the London road. its wheels sinking deep into the turnpike gravel and slowing it down. At 6 o'clock they passed through the Highgate Archway 5 miles from the centre of London. John looked out of the window at the sea of lights in the valley below. The driver applied the brake and the heavily laden coach began to edge its way slowly down the steep incline. The road levelled out into the broad Thames Valley and the horses picked up speed again. They dashed through Kentish Town and Camden, then along the Euston Road and into Tottenham Court Road, before finally arriving at the Black Swan in Holborn just after 7. John's uncle, Henry Bowman, was waiting to meet them. Henry bundled his in-laws into a hired cab and in less than half an hour they were at the elegant, 5-storied townhouse of his grandparents, the physician Dr. Charles Martin and his wife Eliza, in Wimpole Street. "Now, let Millie take your coats, my dears," his grandmother directed as she led them into the large and comfortably appointed drawing room. "Your father and I were so distressed to hear your news from Yorkshire, Charlotte dearest. Christopher was so young. Who could have possibly imagined that he would die? Oh, it's so tragic. It must have been terrible for you to have been among strangers when it happened." Dr. Martin put his hand up to correct his wife. "Eliza, they were not among strangers, they were with Christopher's family. I am sure our daughter could not have been in a better place." Dr. Martin was more than 10 years older than his elegant and domineering wife, and was one of London's leading physicians. Taking a long, slow draught on his pipe he said, "We shall all miss Christopher sorely. He was not only a good son-in-law but my friend. I am sorry that your mother and I were not able to attend his funeral. We would have liked to have paid our respects. I hope that Guy's will hold a memorial service for him." His wife concurred, dabbing the corner of her eye with her handkerchief. "Your father is right, we shall miss him." She turned to John, ignoring her daughter. "John, my dear, you have been so very brave." "Thank you, Grandmama," he replied, thinking that the atmosphere in Wimpole Street was very different from the farmhouse in Yorkshire. At Wimpole Street the rooms were decorated with fine wallpaper and paintings. Mirrors hung on the walls, reflecting the light of the candelabras on the mantelshelf, and there were Kidderminster carpets on the floor. In the huge white marble fireplace the most expensive sea coal burned, blasting out much more heat than the wood fire in the farmhouse inglenook, but for all its physical warmth there was an air of coldness and hostility in the room. The maid arrived with dishes of hot milky tea and plates of bread and butter, which John and his mother ate while his grandfather smoked and his grandmother fidgeted with her handkerchief. "Your father has a new patient, Charlotte," John's grandmother said. "His name is Sir Hubert Haselby, a baronet from Burton-on-Trent. Rumour has it that he has £10,000 a year. Can you believe it? They say he gets his money from coal mines." Dr. Martin looked up. "Well, we burn enough of it to make any man rich, my dear. I don't know what delights your mother more, Charlotte, the fact that he is a knight of the realm or that he is rich." "Your father jests because he thinks I despise these men of new money," Mrs. Martin protested, looking to Charlotte for support that did not come. "Which of course I do not." "But, mother, you do. That's why you didn't like Christopher. He was only the son of a farmer, not a gentleman with a country estate." The old man flashed a warning glance at his wife. "Nonsense, child, I admired him greatly. I just wished," she murmured, unsure she should say what she was thinking. "What did you wish, mother?" demanded Charlotte, with a sliver of ice in her voice. "Well, my dear, I rather wished that you had lived this side of the river. I never liked the fact that you lived in Southwark. It's not respectable. There. I've said it and I'm not ashamed of it." John looked at his grandmother in disbelief. He knew that she never visited them in Southwark, but he had not realized that she despised their home. It was his father's house and he loved it. "Now you two. This is no time to quarrel," interjected Dr. Martin, waving his pipe at his wife. "John, take no heed of this female nonsense." "I won't, Grandpapa," My father was the best of fathers, even if he did live in Southwark.
That's right. My boy. Did you hear that?
Grandmama?
Yes.
Charles.
I did.
John.
Dearest.
You know I'm not heartless. I loved your father and I'm very sorry he's gone. Tears welled up in her enormous blue eyes, leaving John wondering whom the tears were for. He glanced at his mother, who was silently fuming beside her, and decided that the best course of action was to console his grandmother before she caused even more upset.
I know you loved my father,
Grandmama,
he said, looking at his mother for reassurance.
We're all fatigued from our journey and should get some rest.
What a very sensible idea,
John,
said Dr. Martin. Your father would be proud of you. You're such a sensible young fellow. You have looked after your mother well, but now it is our turn to look after you. Grandmama has rooms ready. I suggest that you take yourselves off to get some rest. We can talk in the morning. As Charlotte entered her childhood room, it wrapped its comfort around her like the embrace of an old friend. Her old bed was still there with its green damask cover, so too was the washstand, and the mirror where she used to admire herself before she blew out the candle and dreamed her carefree dreams about the man she would marry. The only difference was the addition of a copper bathtub filled with water next to the fire. You and John will stay here with us now that Christopher has gone, her mother said, in a tone that indicated it was not a matter for discussion. That's very kind of you and father. But Christopher has not gone. As you put it. He died. My husband is dead. I am a widow, not an abandoned child. We know that, dearest. Your father and I comprehend your situation all too clearly, her mother replied, handing her daughter a fresh towel and a bar of soap. You're a woman without a husband and without an income. You cannot simply go back to your old life, Charlotte. It no longer exists. Your father and I have discussed the matter, and we have decided that it is best that you and John stay here where we can provide for you. That is, until you marry again. The flame of fire burning in Charlotte's chest was rekindled and refueled. Whilst she could not dispute her mother's analysis of her situation, she was nonetheless livid with her for expressing it so clearly. As calmly as she could, she said, Mother, I have no plans to remarry. I'm not saying that you have to forget Christopher. I'm not that cruel and insensitive. Her mother pointed to the bath. Your father took this in lieu of payment from a whore in St. James's. The poor woman could not pay her rent either. So your father took the bath before the landlord did. My friend Mrs. Peacock says that bathing is a great benefit for the nerves. So I thought you might like to try it. I shall not be doing so. Of course, I'm too old to change the habits of a lifetime. Besides, they cost a fortune in hot water, which is all very well for Mrs. Peacock. Her husband is a banker. And I can't use poor Millie like this again. She is exhausted with carrying the pails from the kitchen. When her mother had gone, Charlotte launched herself face down onto the bed and let out a long, low scream of frustration. How dare her mother decide what she was going to do with her life without even talking to her about it? And why had she told her about the whore? Was she trying to warn her about what happens to women who are left on their own? The following morning, Charlotte found her sister Emma drinking coffee by the fire with her father. Her younger sister had always been her mother's favorite. Charlotte put this down to the fact that Emma was prettier than she was and more easily manipulated. Emma usually did exactly what her mother wanted, often without even being asked, and, of course, she had done the sensible thing and married a man her mother approved of, the lawyer Henry Bowman. How are you feeling, my dear? Her father inquired as she sat down on the couch. Her father had always been her champion, and she was so immensely grateful that he was there to help her. I am as well as can be expected, Papa. Emma rose from her chair and embraced her sister warmly. Oh, Charlotte, my poor darling. Mother has told me what has happened. I'm so sorry we could not be there to help you. Henry will do everything he can to be a good brother to you. He is Christopher's executor and will find a buyer for your house as soon as he can. What do you mean, Emma? I have no intention of selling my house. And as far as I know, Christopher left no instructions to that effect. Emma's face flushed. I'm sorry if I've spoken out of turn.
But you can't seriously think that you and John are going to return to Tooley Street? She turned to her father. Besides, there are others to consider now. Papa. Dr. Martin waited for his younger daughter to explain her train of thought. Emma nervously smoothed the folds of her dress. Papa. Please do not take offense. I know that you think you're indestructible. But you're not. Both you and Mother are getting older now and... Her father raised his hand to interrupt her. In my profession I am acutely aware of a man's mortality. My dear. I am the very last person to think that I am indestructible. Nevertheless, Emma continued, you and Mother are not getting any younger. And Charlotte is now ideally placed to fulfill her duty and care for you in your old age. Charlotte looked at her father aghast as her sister continued to explain her plan. Henry's business has never been more demanding. And he needs me to support him in it. I know that Christopher worked very hard. But that is no longer relevant. Mother has told me that you have no plans to remarry. And indeed it would be a brave man who took you on. You're an independent spirit. And no man wants an unruly wife. The anger Charlotte had been suppressing since her arrival at Wimpole Street erupted. Emma, I can see that you and Mother are of one mind when it comes to organizing my life. Now that you think I have no husband to do it for me. Why you should think I need the likes of you to do that for me I cannot comprehend. Christopher was never one to organize me. Or my life, our marriage. Unlike yours.